Welcome to the Genesis of Shame podcast. I'm here with Pastor Jeff Mingee from Catalyst Church, and we are here talking about his book, Call to Cooperate. And we're going to focus on a couple of different topics here, but a lot of it is on team building and what that looks like for Christians. And Pastor, again, just welcome back to the show, and glad to have you here.
Thanks so much, Sam. I am honored to be here. I appreciate your voice in the conversation and how you help speak biblical truth to shame that people experience. I think your voice is a needed one these days. So thanks for doing what you do.
Thank you, Pastor. I appreciate that. As we look forward to this topic, I think one of the big things that a lot of people are probably asking, just, for you as a pastor working within a church, how has team building been affected by COVID, right? Because, church dynamics has shifted to, not being able to meet, maybe doing a lot of stuff online. What's that been like for you these past couple of months?
Well, like everybody else, it's been a challenge. That seems to be the common thread among leaders and team members, is that this is hard. It's hard on a number of ways. So in February, we were experiencing as a church what at least I remember as one of our best seasons. Now, it might not be or have been as well as I remember, as great as I remember it, but in my memory, February was great. And we were hitting traction and momentum in all the right places. And then all of a sudden, the world just stopped. And so we've really struggled to regain that momentum. Now, at first, our leadership team, we jumped onto Zoom calls, no sweat. All right, we just took some of our meetings, and it actually forced us to have some conversations that we had not been having regularly. So with Zoom, we just got all of our leaders on the same Zoom call. So that was great for a little while. And then people just stopped showing up. And I think it was just a matter of, man, we're done. We're done with Zoom. We need a timeout. Let's, take a break. And so we're still figuring some of that out. Some of our leaders have started to meet in person again. We've been meeting in person for church now. And so we're regaining that traction. But I have found that leaders and pastors and team members, this has been a hard season in a lot of ways, but we're navigating it the best that we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the effect of physical presence, right? Obviously, from a mental health perspective, that's probably been one of the key factors to consider, because you're not allowed to be close to anyone, even family members, everyone's being super cautious and so on. And then you have church, you have three big pillars, right? You have the family, you have school, and you have church.
Right.
And all three pillars have been affected, and all of them are high levels of physical interaction, right? And because you guys switched to Zoom and then did a lot of online services, what do you think the impact of that, the lack of physical closeness, how that impacted teamwork or just the church in general?
Sure. Well, I think it's pretty heartbreaking for many members of the church. I can think of some of our older women in particular, widows, who on Sunday morning, that's the only maybe positive physical touch they get.
Yeah.
That's probably true of some other people as well, but just the handshake or the hand on the shoulder, or, there are a couple of those women that I would pray with every Sunday when I saw them, and I'd put my hand on their arm and just pray with them. And so now we're doing that through a phone call, and it's great to hear voices, but you're right. It's not the same. And I think it's had a pretty big impact, the absence of that physical presence on the church in general, and then in the team. I mean, there are some conversations that just don't go as well over a video call. You need to be in the room. You need to see body language. And we had a leadership meeting where almost everybody was in the room, but we had two people who Zoomed in. And so we had them up on a computer, and it was kind of like, wait a minute, you're here, you have a voice, we want to hear your voice, but how does this work? So that made it challenging. I'm impressed by in the Gospels how two of the words that Jesus used with his disciples were "with me." Come with me, go this way with me. This with me language. I think that's crucial language in the church.
Yeah.
And COVID has made that tough. And
Mm.
I think re-emphasize that need for positive physical presence.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this leads well into how important is that for team building, right? Because it's very easy, you mentioned reading, whether it be gestures or body language and so on. And I definitely found that with when we did counseling online, like it was like you felt more tired. I think they even did some research on that, how you would feel more tired because you're trying to pick up on all these cues that aren't there when you're with the person in the room,
Right.
and so in regards to team building, like what led you to focus on this aspect of Christians and building solid teams, and what that looks like?
Well, when I wrote the book in 2016, COVID was nowhere on the radar, right? So I wasn't thinking about this, but physical presence with team members very much was.
Yeah.
So I entered into my first full-time ministry position. I was a youth pastor at a relatively large Baptist church in Virginia. Wonderful church. I had a great experience, still have a great relationship with that church.
Hmm.
When I began that position, I found myself operating in three different teamwork situations. There was the staff team where my job was to show up and speak when I was asked to speak and play my role. That was my role, but I needed to be there. There was the team as far as other kind of leaders in the church where I had a voice and I could speak up in the meeting when I had an opinion, and I needed to learn how to work with the secretaries that were in the office next door. And
Mm.
then there was the youth ministry team that I was in charge of. And I set the agenda. I determined who showed up at the meeting. I was in charge. But when I think specifically about working with those secretaries, presence was important. I
Mhm.
found that in that secretary's office, there were 3 or 4 women working in that office space. There was an empty chair. I don't know why it was there. I don't know who put it there or how it got there, but there was an empty chair kind of just right in the middle of the room. One of the best leadership moves I made, I realize in retrospect, was regularly I would walk into the office and just sit down in that chair and
Yeah.
talk. And so I'd talk about their grandchildren. I'd talk about their kids. I ended up doing the wedding for one of their daughters.
Mm.
It was just my physical presence in the room built a lot of the relational bridges that we needed to cross for some ministry purposes later. So
Mhm.
physical presence was and still is very much a part of the teamwork experience for the Christian.
Mhm. And and it's important, I think, as you kind of made that point to me with your secretaries, and to kind of be there and have that presence there, because I think maybe often they just kind of take the background, right?
I
So
think you're
you
right.
made an emphasis to make sure that everyone kind of sensed that presence, that you were there for them, that you're willing to work together, get to know them, right? Not just come in and give orders and so on, but really connecting with them. So that seems to be a big part of be cooperating in a team, right? Getting to know people.
Yep, absolutely. I think it is. And I still am. I'm the guy in the office that'll knock on your door and just chat for 20 minutes.
Gotcha.
That's how I operate. So even today, I stopped by to give a birthday present to our worship leader, just checking in with him, talking about some things. I ended up standing in his doorway for about 20, 25 minutes. Um, he didn't say I was interrupting him. That's because
Right.
he's a really nice guy. But I'm sure I kind of disrupted the morning. But I agree with you, Sam. I think being able to stand in the hallway or to see their face or to sit in the room, I think that's a big part of ministry,
Mhm.
ministering to each other and cooperating together in teamwork.
Yeah, yeah, and do you see any correlations to maybe how Jesus would meet with his disciples? I mean, are there any particular aspects of his ministry, of his choosing of the disciples, that you kind of follow, like any model that he presented?
Absolutely. You look at the Gospels and they're just packed with teamwork. And a lot of the teamwork that Jesus and the disciples experienced, some of that we're left to imagine. I mean, I can only imagine what it was like to spend 3 years with 12 guys, right? In that proximity. I
Yeah.
went backpacking with a buddy of mine for 2 weeks. And at the end of 2 weeks, we were like, get away from me, man. I don't, I love you, but I'll talk to you in a month. So Jesus, as we look at the Gospels, we see three specific categories as Jesus operated in teamwork. First of all, he valued teamwork. So as we look at the fact that Jesus valued teamwork, we as Christians ought to say, well, do I value teamwork? I mean, do I really value the fact that I'm cooperating with the other people on this team? As college students enter the workplace, one of the most challenging lessons they're going to have to learn is how to work with people.
Right.
You know, we all know the high school group project, right? Where one guy does all the work and another guy does none of the work. And, you know, we think that that's limited to high school, and we find out it's not in the workplace. So Jesus valued teamwork. So should we. And then we see that Jesus empowered the team. As he worked with the disciples, he empowered them to do ministry. It wasn't just hey, watch the professional. It was, I'm going to empower you. And then finally, Jesus sent the team. He sent the team. And I think that's an important aspect for Christians in teamwork. We need to value teamwork. We need to empower others that we're working with. And then we need to finally send them out. As a senior pastor, particularly, I'm aware that our staff members may not work at Catalyst forever. Now, I don't understand that, right? I think everybody should work at Catalyst all the time. It's the best church there is, right? That's just kind of my category. But I've got to recognize, you know, hold everybody with an open hand and trust that the Lord is going to accomplish his purposes as he sends people out to the, you know, the ends of the earth for his purposes. So, yeah, absolutely. I think as we read the Gospels and we see Jesus operating in the context of teamwork, I think we learn to value teamwork just as Jesus did.
Oh, that's good, Pastor. And, you know, as you were talking about that and you were saying how you went with your friend camping and after 2 weeks, it's kind of like, you know, let's get away from each other for a little bit. I'm imagining Jesus, and Jesus obviously discipling his disciples, but you had different personalities on that team as well. And, you know, when you're cooperating on a team and you're working together on a team, sometimes personalities clash, you know, and obviously we always think of Peter. We may think of doubting Thomas, like, you know, the plans are going to work out this time. And then you have John, who's the loyal friend, you know, he's just right there, right, always encouraging and so on. I mean, how do you tie all of that together? How do you get people with different personalities? And I think we talked about this a little bit last time about being mission focused and one singular mission. But yeah, I mean, how do you balance out those personalities, and is the goal to make them all like each other or work together, or, you know, how do you process that?
Well, I think the answer is very carefully, right? How do you get people to work together? Very carefully. In fact, I think there's a reason in the Gospels that Jesus took us through what we often refer to as the church discipline model in Matthew 18. It's really reconciliation, right? It's about reconciling people that are at odds because of sin. Well, whether it's because of sin or it's because of personality clashes and conflicts, we need to figure out how to navigate some of the tough stuff of relationships in our teams. So I think a couple of things that somebody can do. Let's say you walk on to a team, you join, and you realize right out of the gate, oh man, my personality and that guy's personality, they just clash. A couple of things that you can do. One, just go ahead and acknowledge it, right? Not everybody on the team is going to like you, and that's okay, right? You're not going to like everybody on the team in the same way. That's okay. I think there's this kind of false idea that we tend to buy into that, man, if everybody's not my best friend, I'm in trouble. No, that's just not true. That's just not true. So one, acknowledge it. Two, though, is to affirm them where you can. Right? Affirm them where you can. I have found that it is important to celebrate people whenever I can, especially the people whose personalities I disagree with or differ from, right? Because our relationship, it's going to be marked by that difference. We're going to feel it. I'm going to feel it. They're going to feel it. We're going to clash. So if I can affirm them every time I see, you know, the Lord doing something through them, or every time I'm encouraged by them, when I affirm them, I'm offsetting some of that personality difference. So I think those are two key aspects. I think you see, okay, let's acknowledge it, let's recognize it, and let's affirm them where we can.
That's good. That's really good. Yeah, because I think people get scared about that. I think to your point, they confuse the working together as forcefully having to like
Yeah.
someone else on the team. And it's really about getting them on the same page. You make a point in your book about celebrating teams, and how those tend to be the best types of teams. And every team, as in every classroom, you always have the one antagonist per se, the one person who combats everything and is not celebrating the team. But focusing on that aspect of celebrating, tell us about that, about what is it about celebrating teams that makes them effective?
Well, everyone loves to be celebrated, right? I read or heard one time that our favorite sound is our own voice, and our favorite word is our name spoken by somebody else. Right? We love to hear our name. So everybody loves to get celebrated, but here's the deal: very few people are intentional about celebrating other people. So when I was in youth ministry, I looked around at our volunteers and I realized that, man, they're all working 9 to 5 plus jobs, 40 hours plus a week. They're all wrestling with family issues and these other just life issues. And most of them aren't being celebrated anywhere. There's nobody saying, man, I thank God for you. Man, I'm so glad that you're on the team. They're not being celebrated at work. Uh, they're not being celebrated on their, when they volunteer for their kids' baseball team, right? So how can I, as a leader and a team member, celebrate them? I am convinced that the best teams are celebrating teams or bragging teams, depends on how you look at it, right? But I'm convinced that if we want to celebrate God's work through somebody, let's just take a time out and celebrate how God's at work through them. We see the Apostle Paul do this all of the time, right? Romans 16, you've got this mountain of a theological letter in the book of Romans. And he gets to the end of it, and it's a chapter full of names. He's celebrating God's work through these people. Philippians chapter 2, he pauses in the middle of this theological letter, and he says, let me tell you about Timothy and Epaphroditus. And he says, man, I've got nobody like them. I mean, Timothy's the best. And it's almost like he's, just bragging on his friends, but he's celebrating God's work through these people. What would it look like for your listener to stop and say, hold on, let's just celebrate somebody? This past Sunday, it was our worship leader's birthday. And so I stopped during our announcements and said, hey, I just want to take a minute and recognize God's gift to us in Zach, and we took a minute and celebrated him. And, he didn't enjoy it. I mean, he's not seeking the spotlight. He's very humble like that. But I wanted the church to take a moment and just celebrate them. Celebrate him. Every once in a while, we'll do that with one of our volunteers just to highlight, and you are a gift of grace to us, and we thank God for you. I think that is a practice that many Christians fall out of because we're not intentional about. When I do premarital counseling, one of the activities that I'll have them do is I'll give them 60 seconds to name 5 things that they love about their spouse. Just 5 things in 60 seconds. And, it's funny because they'll kind of squirm for a minute, like, oh, I got to think of 5 things. But then once they get going, it's hard for them to stop, right? Because they're like, oh, and that, and that, and that. And, oh, I love that. And, oh, you do that so well. And so they're affirming each other. But what I tell them is that they need to make that a regular practice. Because I'd be willing to bet, just like we said, most people aren't celebrated in their workplace. Most people aren't celebrated in their marriage either. Right? When is the last time that I stopped and said, okay, to my wife, let me just affirm you in some ways. Let me celebrate you. Let me make a big deal about you. So I think part of cooperation in a way that honors the image of God in the other person is to celebrate them, to celebrate God's work through them. I don't think God is threatened by that. right? I don't think he's like worried about, oh man, they're getting my glory. Like I think we need to be careful about that. But Philippians 2, honor such men. I think we glorify God when we celebrate our team members as they bear the image of God well and we work together.
Mm-hmm. That's such an important point too, because I think we often fall into the trap. I think you kind of alluded to it, the trap of being Christian martyrs. Like, I don't need the praise. I'm just going to work through and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And, if I get it, that's fine. If I don't, that's fine. But to be intentional from a leader's perspective, for you as a pastor to see those needs, and people remember that, and it's one of those things where, my pastor who God is using just spoke to me about something and encouraged me in that. And they remember those things. And, a small reflection of God's grace on us, that he sees us, that he notices us. And I think that's such an important point, because I do think that we do often fall into that trap of, I don't need that, but it still feels good. And it is a good thing to be encouraged.
Yeah, absolutely. And Proverbs makes that clear. A word rightly timed, and it can bring gladness to a man's heart in a time of anxiety. I think those words can be life-giving words. In fact, if we think about some of our listeners, let's imagine we've got a college student that's getting ready to enter the workplace. Right? If they were to make themselves a regular celebratory team member, they're going to skyrocket to the top of the company, right? I mean, they're just going to automatically become one of the favorite people in the company. Now, how can you do that? Well, there's some very simple ways. Use social media, right? If your organization has a Facebook page or a group page, don't be afraid to just get on and say, hey, just want to point out that John did a phenomenal job on that project. That was so much fun. He made this so easy. So social media makes it very easy. We can do things like sending the right people an email, right? A quick email to somebody's boss. Hey, they just did a great job. No, the boss normally gets the email when they do a horrible job. Right. So let's be the voice that celebrates them. A handwritten letter is a great way to make a word of affirmation go a long way. Most people don't get handwritten letters. Or a phone call, right? Your phone does more than send text messages. So you can pick it up.
They're often missed, right? The phone calls is like, what's that?
Yeah. But just to hear somebody's voice and then to hear them affirm you, and that can go a really long way. And when it's appropriate, at team meetings, to say, hey, can I just point out something that's been encouraging to me as a member of this team? The way Jennifer served in that situation, man, that helped us so much, and just to celebrate somebody. So there are some very simple and practical ways that you can be a celebratory team member and be a voice of encouragement on your team.
Yeah. Pastor Jeff, one of the things that I've found in regards to that is with people, oftentimes what they say to others is sometimes a reflection of what they say to themselves. So for example, when we're talking about finding something positive, if they get praised for something, they don't believe it. It's very weird. Like, I have with students at a council, I'll point out an area that they're working on, that they made progress in, and they almost like don't want to believe it, even though it's there, and I can give them solid examples of what that was like. But it's this internal dialogue that they have that, that I'm not worth it. So for some that it may feel weird when they receive praise, I think with repetition and having those clear examples of here's how you were serviceful, here's how you were loving to this person. So sometimes providing examples gives them the picture of what we see, because I think saying you're so servant-hearted, for them, it's very vague sometimes. But if you say, here's when I saw you be a servant to someone else, and boom, and they're like, oh yeah, they start piecing things together. So that's just one of those things where that I've noticed as well, is that if they have an example of what you're seeing, that they're like, oh, okay, so that's what they're seeing. And that makes more sense to me as they start to work through those negative conversations that they have with themselves.
Absolutely.
But yeah, how does God work through us and through our teams? Like, what is God trying to accomplish in all of this? Because I've often heard too, like, we talk about difficult people on teams. God's building your character with that person. But this person might be doing a lot of damage to the team. They might be spreading rumors, they might be gossiping, they might be, just kind of rubbing everyone the wrong way. How does God work through us, through our teams?
Sure. Well, I think if we take a sort of a macro picture, a big picture, and we look at Scripture, we can say a couple of things for sure. Well, everybody that we serve on a team with is made in the image of God. Whether their personality clashes with ours or whether it meshes well with ours, no matter what role they play on the team, whether they're the janitor or they have the keys to the building or they're in the top office, they're all made in the image of God. So I think part of what God is doing in us and through us and the way he uses us on our teams is to affirm the Imago Dei, affirm the image of God in each other, to treat one another with all dignity and respect, to live at peace with all people so far as is able. So I think that is a foundational first piece. Well, let's zoom all the way to the end of the book of the Bible. We get to the book of Revelation, right? One of the things that we notice is that there are no, at least as far as I can tell, no solos sung in heaven. It's all congregational singing. So I think one of the things that God is doing in us and through us on our teams is he's getting us ready for heaven. He's preparing our hearts to sing with our neighbor, right? To cooperate now so that we enjoy cooperating then. So I think when we look at the biblical framework, we've got every person made in the image of God. We've got working towards the glory of God together, which we see in heaven. Even heaven calls us to teamwork. I think the mission of the church of making Christ known to the nations is an important thing to remember as we work together with teams. We realize that the gospel frees us to teamwork as it addresses my idols and my fear and my shame and my insecurities. And it frees me to be honest with those that I serve with and cooperate with. It also compels me to teamwork. I mean, the gospel is just too big for me to hold on as a Lone Ranger Christian. It's just too big, and it's too good, quite frankly, right? And so I find that I enjoy the gospel better when I'm in right relationship with people. And when I'm not, I struggle to enjoy the gospel as much, right? I think there's a correlation there. So how does God work in us through the teams that we work with and we work on? I think he affirms the image of God in all people. I think he reminds us of heaven and the congregational singing and worship that we'll be a part of. I think he gets us back on the mission. What I'm convinced of, and I go into, I explain this in the book, is as we develop a theology of teamwork, we'll both deepen our enjoyment of God and work better together as we cooperate on teams.
That's powerful. Something that we don't often think about, like the eternal aspect of cooperating together now. Anyone listening right now is either a leader or a teammate, right? What would be your advice on being, for leaders and working with their teams and those who are on the team? What would be your advice to them?
Well, I would encourage them to enjoy the journey as best you can. Now, that's easier said than done, especially in 2020, right? Nobody's enjoying this journey. We're all ready for whatever's next.
Right.
But just take a deep breath, especially as a leader, and remember, okay, you're doing the best you can, if you're doing the best you can, and the people that you work with, they're probably doing the best they can as well. So give them the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, I would encourage team leaders, buy a bunch of copies of the book and work through it with your team. It's designed to be read as a team. In fact, when I wrote the book, I wrote it with our youth ministry team in mind. I recalled many of the volunteers that I worked with, and I recognized that most of them don't have the desire to read a book. So I kept it short. All right. And then many Christians aren't reading their Bible the way that they ought to. And so it's biblical. I mean, we're going to be working through passages. We're going to dig into Moses and Moses's life. And then we're going to dig into Deborah and Nehemiah. And then we're going to look at the prophets, and then we'll get into the wisdom literature and the gospels. And so we're walking through all of the categories of scripture from eternity past to eternity future. So if you're a leader on the team, I would encourage you to buy the book for your team, but I would encourage you to be a celebratory leader, right? Celebrate those on your team. When you see an evidence of grace, God at work in them, stop whatever you're doing, write them a handwritten card, put it in the mail, take time on a Sunday morning, especially right now, right? We need wins in our congregational meetings. We need encouraging notes. Well, stop and point out the volunteer that showed up before anybody else showed up this morning to spray down the pews or wipe down the pews and make sure everything was sanitized. Right? Tell them about Greg, who stays late every Sunday to make sure things get cleaned up properly and sanitized for the next church that comes in. We meet in a building that is shared by multiple churches. So that's, Greg stays after. You tell them about the volunteers, and don't be afraid to take time during your Sunday morning and celebrate people. And if you're a team member, I would encourage you to be a team member worth celebrating, right? Be an active, participating team member. Think, okay, if I were the leader, would I celebrate me? And what can I do that's worth celebrating? Not because we're doing it to get praise, but because we ought to do it. And then don't be afraid to encourage your leader. The statistics right now on pastors are terrifying. I mean, at least the ones I read, something like 70-80% are looking for other jobs. That's scary. And that could be bad.
Anxiety. Yep.
Yeah, that can be bad news for the church. So if you're a team member and you've got a leader, just encourage them. Your leader is probably doing the best that they can. So for you to send them a note, send them a card in the mail, or just tell them that you appreciate them, your words could go a really long way in the life and the encouragement and the heart of a leader.
Amen to that, Pastor Jeff. I agree to all that. All those are really, really great points. Guys, this is Pastor Jeff Mingee from Catalyst Church. He has a book called Call to Cooperate. I'll put the link on the video, and hopefully you guys can buy one for you and your teams, and that it's a blessing to you. Pastor Jeff, thank you for being on the show again. I really appreciate you, sir.
Thanks so much, Sam.
Yep. Have a good one, sir.